Hello. In this quick tutorial, we're going to see how to get started with Composer 2. This contents assumes that you have a basic understanding of Composer 1. You may also want to check another video we have created on what's new in Composer 2 to get an overview of all the features. My name is Filip Knapik and I'm a product manager for Cloud Composer. Let's get started. In this tutorial, we're going to cover key differences between Composer 1 and Composer 2, environment creation both in the user interface as well as through gcloud, scaling considerations, and environment monitoring. Composer 2 differs from Composer 1 in many ways. First of all, the new version comes without a scaling of workers. Composer applies size selections directly to workers, schedulers, and web server, unlike its predecessor that relied on GC instance sizing. This change also eliminates the risk of workers and schedulers competing for capacity in a shared GC instance. The new version of the product removes GCE charges and includes compute costs under Cloud Composer pricing model. All compute instances used by Cloud Composer 2 are shielded by default. The new version supports Airflow 2 only. At this moment, Composer 2 is available in public preview and general availability is planned for late 2021. Please refer to our documentation for additional details. Let's create a new Composer 2 environment using Cloud Console. Under Create Environment, you now have two options, Composer 1 and Composer 2. But before we click on Composer 2, let me encourage you to use another option. Read about Cloud Composer versions. After clicking on that link, you're going to be directed to our documentation that covers key differences between both versions of the product and also allows you to quickly access Cloud Composer 2 documentation. So I highly encourage you to have a look into this even prior to creation of the first environment. Let's switch back to our environment creation. Under Create Environment, let's now choose Composer 2 option to see the creation form. Let's create a new environment. Let's give our environment a name. Let's stick to US Central 1, but note that all Composer regions are available in the list. Under the image version, we have a few options now, and this list will evolve with new versions of Composer and Airflow. Cloud Composer is a managed product and requires maintenance activities like patching of compute instances or SQL databases. In order to avoid disruption to your DAG runs, you should set maintenance window to a time when your DAGs don't run. Note that this feature is also available in Composer 1, and it's equally important to be set in your existing environments. Labels, environment variables, and Airflow configuration overrides work in the same way as in Composer 1. Environment resources section is significantly different in this version. First of all, you have three presets that cover standard environment sizes: small, medium, and large. Under each of these presets, you have default size values for Airflow components, including compute size for a single scheduler, number of schedulers that will run in parallel, web server size, worker size, number of workers defined as a range. Autoscaler will use this range to change the number of workers depending on the number of tasks in a queue. Last but not least is the core infrastructure section, where environment includes Airflow internal components like a task queue or SQL database. By switching between presets, you can now see how they differ from a capacity perspective. If you want to tailor your environment to a specific use case or performance characteristic, you may choose the custom option, where all of the settings are unlocked and can be independently changed. Note that Composer 2 pricing is not dependent on presets, but the actual amount of resources used over time. From a pricing perspective, it doesn't matter if an environment is created using a custom setting or, for example, a medium preset. What's important is the total consumption of CPU, memory, and other resources. Note that web server, worker, and schedulers use CPU, memory, and storage in the same way from a pricing perspective. Network configuration hasn't changed much, and so we will skip it in this tutorial. Let's hit Create to get our environment created. If you want to create an environment using gcloud, first go to Composer 2 documentation and under Create Environments, choose gcloud. Note that you need to use gcloud beta as Composer 2 is not yet in GA. You also need to specify a Composer 2 image, as otherwise it would default to Composer 1. You can get the name of the image from the Cloud Console drop-down list. This command will create an environment with a default size, which is a small preset. If you want to specify a custom size of an environment, use another example provided in our documentation, as shown in here. As you start with Composer 2, you can use the following high-level guidance to select a size preset for your environment. While every use case is different and actual capacity needs vary significantly, typically, if you run up to 40 simple DAGs in parallel, you might be fine with a small preset. Medium should be able to handle roughly 120 concurrent DAGs, and large preset should typically handle up to 250 parallel DAG runs. Given the number of variables involved, like concurrent tasks or computational complexity, we can't guarantee that presets have sufficient capacity for these numbers of concurrent DAGs. However, you can use these numbers as a starting point in the sizing exercise. Once you create an environment, you can monitor its key performance metrics using the updated Monitoring tab. Let's switch over to the Cloud Console. Workers panel presents multiple metrics related to workers' scale and health. What we're seeing now is an environment scaling between 1 and 3 workers following an hourly cycle of DAG runs. As we can see, the number of workers changes, and so do CPU and memory charts. Scaling out and in is based on the number of queued tasks that we can observe in this chart. Database usage and health metrics indicate whether the environment size under the core infrastructure section was properly set. As you can see, we have no problems in this environment. Another interesting section is schedulers, where we can see total schedulers infrastructure usage, which was not available in the previous version of Cloud Composer. These charts can be helpful when deciding whether to scale the schedulers up or out. Let's go through a few more recommendations that can help you get started with Composer 2. Selection of a worker size defines autoscaling granularity, as this is the unit by which an environment can scale up and down. Large workers can typically handle more concurrent tasks, and so Composer's worker concurrency setting defaults to 12 tasks per worker CPU. For example, small environment having half of a CPU core per worker can handle 6 concurrent tasks per worker. If you want Airflow workers to handle more or less tasks at once, you can use configuration override capability to override this default. If your environment has idle periods, you may consider keeping the minimum number of workers to 1, as this will make idle periods more cost efficient. Note that scaling out takes some time, and so increasing the number of minimum workers may improve responsiveness during bursty DAG runs. Maximum number of workers is a trade-off between access to high capacity and cost control risks. Environment size selection guidance is similar to the presets covered before and depends on the number of concurrent DAG runs, among other factors. Also here, this is a starting point guidance, and you may need to adjust these values based on the actual usage metrics observed in the Monitoring tab. Feel free to give Composer 2 a try right away, let us know your feedback, and thank you very much.